Welcome back to Breakfast Central. Now we're looking at movie production in Africa. So much goes into making a film, budgeting, financing. Of course, without a budget, we wouldn't have a decent movie being made. Now, one of the biggest nightmares of producers would be piracy. Today, we're joined by Bukola Oloyede as she explains with us all the behind the scenes that goes into producing a movie. Let's take a look.
We did it! Hi, my name is Bukola Oloyede. I'm a TV producer, filmmaker, you can call me that. I like to call myself a content genius because I live and breathe and dream content. And I'm always looking to expand what we do, how we do it, and how we tell our stories here in Africa. So I'm a firm believer in putting your money where your mouth is. I have financed the web series myself, at least the first few episodes. And I think the way that I'm managing it is to break the way that I shoot so that I can maximize the time that I have on set with my crew, my actors, and spread the way that I also make payments as well. So this is actually fully funded by myself, and there's no sponsors, because I didn't also want to be, to be held back by waiting for responses from one sponsor or the other. Once I decided that I was going to do this, I said, what's it going to take? How much is it going to cost? I put the money aside and I started shooting. I don't think anybody is prepared really for piracy. We don't really want to talk about or hope that our content will be pirated because, it's a lot of blood, sweat, and tears and a lot of money that goes into what we do. So I'm just hoping. This is a project, or should I say, this is like a passion of mine, and what I hope to do with it is to really just drive people to have the conversations that I hope that young people will be having. I'm not too worried about piracy at this point because it's on YouTube, so it's open for everybody to see. It's open for the whole world basically to access. So if I was maybe making it hush-hush and putting it like on a film or maybe taking it to the cinemas, and that's a different thing. I'm just gonna have to hope that people love the content and respect it enough to leave it where it is. I would say, keep dreaming, keep doing. There's a point where you stop dreaming and you start doing, and I would also say start from where you are and start with what you have. There are a lot of people that have started, you see them on the news, you see them on TV, and they're so big, but they started from somewhere. Sometimes, what lack makes you creative. The lack of something makes you creative enough to think of innovative ways that you can express yourself and you can get your content out there. So if you're a young filmmaker and you're thinking, you need big budgets, you need big films, you need big cameras and big studios, there are people who are creating content from their backyards, from their garages, from their driveways, in their rooms. And so don't be trapped, don't get trapped by the idea that the bigger the better. Start with what you have, grow your audience, and I think if you put out good enough stuff, the big bucks will come after you.
And that was our conversation with Bukola Oloyede, film producer and filmmaker, TV producer and filmmaker. I think this is an all-important conversation that we must have. Joe and Osange, we're looking at budgeting and piracy and some of the challenges that surround making films in Africa. But one of the things that she said that stood out the most for me would be the fact that she said, start from wherever you are, make films with your mobile phones, and just basically expand. Start from where you are and expand. I think that stood out for me because I'm very passionate about content creation, and I would say that one of my biggest tools is my mobile phone. In fact, I know how to use my mobile phone much better than I can use my camera.
Because you're used to it. It's what you're used to. That's what you actually make use of. But I agree with the fact that Africa is indeed a niche market right about now. We have streaming platforms that are actually coming down and into Africa because if you take a look at the Western world, they've practically told all the stories, Olive and Osauge. They've told all the stories from war movies to stories concerning kingship, hierarchy, to action, to just name them. But Africa has a lot of untapped stories that these streaming platforms are starting to stream into. They're starting to come to Africa, I beg your pardon, to see how they can tap into it. I mean, we've got folklores, we've got stories concerning the African myth and traditions. We've got stories concerning who we are. We've got stories concerning our languages, diverse culture and people. It will also shock a lot of Africans when they hear of stories about their own African country or state, a particular tribe, what they do. They'll be amazed, like, oh, really? I never knew this, that we do this even in my own country. So it's very, very true that if you are aspiring to become a young movie maker, well, I'll take the words that she said, don't wait, start now, and you never know what is waiting for you in the future.
Now, speaking about what you just mentioned, Joe, you've talked about the fact that we need to tell our own stories. There's so many stories that remain untold here in Africa, but what we do see is that unfortunately some people are not willing to tell these stories because they're looking at the commercial benefits. Now, I've heard people say, I would never pay my money to go and watch something that would be telling stories of war or crisis. I want to watch comedy. I want to laugh. I want to watch love because I want to be able to escape from reality. So the question now is, where do we draw the line? How do we encourage more young filmmakers to tell African stories? Because at the end of the day, when we don't tell the stories, we see the Western world come into Africa and tell the stories. Very recently on Twitter, we saw someone who is a Westerner writing a book titled Sorosoke, which is a term coined by Nigerians that describe the struggle young people experience during NSAS. And later I'll be shouting cultural appropriation. So what can we do to encourage young filmmakers to tell more African stories?
I wanted to know, sorry, Olive, has she been sued yet?
Well, I don't have update on that
think so.
yet, so I can't speak on that. But
I don't think so. I mean, but you know, who exactly is going to sue her? You know, and we also need to be sure exactly who the first person was. You know, who started using that term. I remember it came up during the NSAS protest. But you know what Oliver said is simply exactly the way things are. If you let other people take advantage of your situation or take advantage of your story, they will rewrite those stories. And so Africans need to, you know, start to write their stories from the African perspective, you know, not from the Hollywood perspective. We should be able to tell the stories, you know, from our history, from our perspective. And of course, you know, people want to learn about the African heroes that, you know, we read about in books. Let's make movies as much as we can. And I also agree with Ms. Oloyede. The whole concept of waiting for a big budget doesn't necessarily work. We can see what the Ikorodu boys, for example, are doing.
Oh,
you know, they're making you know, little bits of, you know, on their own level. You know, on their. I know they started with cell phones, and so we can always create something and continue to expand on the African space.
Joe, before we wrap up, there's a question I'd like to ask. You know, flowing from all that we've said, is it just about Africans telling our Africa story originally, or Africans developing a desire to learn about the African story? And I asked this because a lot of the time, demand is what determines what is being produced. So if there isn't a demand for a lot of stories telling the African, you know, showing the African story, the African culture and the African traditions, we wouldn't see more filmmakers telling the stories, what the market wants. So maybe shouldn't we go back to talking about creating that interest, starting from schools and putting history as part of our curriculum for young people? Shouldn't that be the focus right now? Going back to creating an interest for history, culture, and tradition in Africa.
I agree with you, Olive. It's a bit of both. It's a mixture of both, telling our stories and having the desire to do so. It's one thing to rewrite and change the narratives, and another thing for us to ensure that whatever we are indeed sharing is something that the world will be amazed at. Let me take you back to a few years ago. I mean, although he's late now, I'm talking about Chadwick Boseman, who starred as the king, of course, Wakanda. We saw what that movement did to the entire world, not just Africa. When everyone saw Wakanda, everybody was shouting, Wakanda now, Wakanda now, of course. Built on the premise and, of course, the fabric of an African tradition, who actually has become a world-class superhero. And just that alone, we saw in that movie where he was touted to have come to Nigeria, the northern part, to rescue the Chibok girls. You see how that story was written? It was written from the person, the character, and then moved into a real life situation and story, of course, which we're still facing now, and then brought to the fore to let people know that, listen, this is a tradition, this is a story, this is a character, this is Africa, and there you have a superhero who saves the day. What a way to put it in the minds of even the kids, where everyone was doing this. Now, what about us telling other stories? You've got Shaka Zulu, King Shaka Zulu, you've got Shango, you've got so many other stories. Of course, most are myth, but of course, you do have other stories that can be surrounded concerning the African tradition or around the African tradition and so on and so forth. So these are the things that we should start doing. Yes, I agree. We go back to history. Let's start to read more. Let's start to learn more, educate more. I also need to read. I need to read more. I need to learn some more about other cultures in Nigeria and other African countries such as Zambia, Zimbabwe, Kenya, Mozambique. I need to know who is that hero that they are looking up to. Imagine doing a movie of someone who actually they could say emanated from the family line of Nelson Mandela. Now, what would that story be like? We've seen the Western world act Nelson Mandela. I'm sure we know that, right? We saw, you know, it's quite funny. We saw them act Nelson Mandela. And I asked the question, why wasn't any African ripe enough to have acted that particular character or role?
Very important question, Joe. And you know, you've hit the nail on the head. We need to tell more African stories, show more African superheroes, and also share the story of some of our tragedies, because we can't wave away our tragedies like it didn't happen. It's why I love what's happening in Rwanda. If you travel to Rwanda, you'll be able to see, you know, the relics of the genocide. We must be able to preserve bits of our culture, even the unpleasant ones, because it is when you understand where you're coming from that you'll be able to project where you're going to. Like the Igbos say, Ozoemina. Yes.
But I just want to quickly mention, I know my sound might not be perfect, but it would be great to see what Marvel has done for the Thor character. We should have an indigenous, Shango, let's tell a story like that. Let's see what, Shango and Shaka Zulu, like you mentioned, and Queen Emota and some of all those people, we should be able to create those characters and make blockbuster movies of these persons or these gods.
Well, I can shock you, Osage. The characters have actually been created. Shout out to Nigeria's own Comic-Con. They've created amazing characters. Their cartoon characters are out there. Their comics are out there in the open. Sadly, a lot of Nigerians are not buying Nigeria. But when you come to this Nigerian Comic-Con, which is held in previous years, of course, before the pandemic, you get to see how Nigerians are very creative. The creative industry is indeed one place where the government should start thinking of investing a lot of money, because everyone who is in that industry, I can tell you, are worthy of bringing in a lot of investment in terms of money. I mean, Marvel is not just looking for other stories to tell. They do have a year plan of all their characters, but why is it that they're also moving to other African countries to start looking for what they can do? You do have other streaming platforms who are equally looking for original stories to equally produce and create, and that's why they're moving from different African countries. Nigeria is one key market that they are actually looking into. South Africa is also there. Don't forget you have countries like Namibia, Zimbabwe, and the likes, just to mention a few. So I agree with you. We do have good characters that will tell good stories, funny ones too if you need to add comedy to it, but it's something that we need to start. I think it starts from us, just as News Central is. I mean, we're Africa first. We tell the African story. That's who we are. So we just need to start changing the narratives and let people know that this is what we stand for.
Absolutely. It's been a very interesting conversation. We hope that more young movie producers will be encouraged to start producing these movies, and more people be encouraged to invest as well as develop interest in understanding our stories, our culture, our history, and where we plan to go to. That's all we can take for now. We'll go on a quick break. When we come back, we'll be wrapping things up with some of our headlines around the continent. Please don't go away.